Yo everybody, Brezzy43 here coming at you with our next video. So we are almost done with our mini-series here. We've been talking about competitive Pokemon and sort of the ins and outs of that. We've talked about natures and IVs and EVs and optimizing all of those things, and now we get to actually get into some of the fun team building aspects behind VGC. So Pokemon is a very dynamic game. There's lots of moving pieces going on, and I think now we've got enough foundations to actually talk about teams and what team building looks like, and how to kind of go about it from here. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. I have in front of you here, in front of me here, victoryroadvgc.com. This is a fantastic website for those of you who want to play competitive Pokemon without having to build a team right away. I actually strongly recommend that. There's a couple of my friends that have recently reached out that I've been talking through most of these videos with and sharing this information with, who are newer to the game or are coming back to the game from not taking a long break from it. And they are a little bit rusty on the interactions. The battles are dynamic. There's 2 versus 2 rather than 1 versus 1, and there's a lot of moving pieces. There's weather, there's terrain, there's Dynamax move boosts, there's speed boosts, there's all these different things going on there. And there's also, for a lot of my friends, this is the first time that they've been playing with the fairy typing. So back in, fairy was introduced later on. It was actually introduced in Generation 6, I believe. Don't quote me on that 100%, but I think X and Y was the first time we actually saw the fairy typing. And they went back through to a bunch of the older Pokemon that were not originally fairy typing and added fairy to their typing. So this is what I would recommend for people like my friends or people who are just wanting to get the hang of the battles first. And that is to go to this website, victoryroadvgc.com, and take a gander at these rental teams. These are teams created by some really well-known players. You've got Aaron Zhang. You've got Joe UX9, who's a streamer. I know that Wolfie's got a team on here. You've also got Rio Pacer, who's also a streamer. Osiris, who also does some streaming and some YouTube stuff. Pokey Alex. These guys have created some really good teams and shared them with everyone. And this can be a really good way to start. These teams are kind of categorized based on Pokemon that are on the team. So these are all Moltres Galar teams. These are all teams centered around Metagross, or centered around Urshifu offensive teams, Dusclops Glastrier teams, Lapras teams, Regigigas teams, and then some other maybe not so traditional teams that are seeing play. That then you also as you can see, there's a lot of things going on with all these teams. So if you're interested in using one of these, you go to your Versus tab on your Switch, you go into competitive, and you can actually rent the team using this code at the bottom. Whatever team you want to rent, you just go ahead and give it a click, and it pulls it up. And from here, you can enter this code and temporarily borrow the team. It's a super, super fantastic way to use somebody else's team that's been built relatively well. A lot of these players know what they're doing. A lot of them have done well. You know, Aaron Zhang and Wolf Glick are decorated players themselves. Joe UX9's a pretty good streamer. I enjoy watching his content as well. And then Rio Pacer I watch occasionally, as well as Osiris. All of these guys have competed at high levels of Pokemon, and they've all built really interesting teams and shared them here. So you can take a gander, find one that you like. Maybe you're really interested in using this Moltres team with Trick Room on it, and maybe you decide that this is the one that you want to go with. So you click on this, you enter the code, you borrow it temporarily. Now this won't actually give you the Pokemon in game, obviously, but it will allow you to battle on the competitive ranked ladder with these Pokemon. So yeah, this is a great way for you to get the hang of different things. As you can see, there's a lot of different Pokemon, a lot of different types, a lot of different things going on. There's a lot for you to explore in these teams. So that's rental teams. That's how this works. I want to take a minute here, take the bulk of this video to talk about some of the team building things that all of these teams implement in some capacity. So first and foremost, probably the most important aspect of your team that you can team build for is what players refer to as speed control. So what is speed control? Speed control is basically just the blanket term for ensuring that your Pokemon attacks before your opponent's Pokemon. There's a handful of ways that you can do this, but up until Sword and Shield, there were primarily Tailwind and Trick Room, which kind of work opposite of each other. So, for those of you that don't know, Tailwind is a move that essentially affects your side of the battlefield only, and I don't know what else to call it besides like a battlefield modifier. It's not a status condition, but it's a battlefield modifier for your side of the field that essentially gives any of your active Pokemon double speed for 4 turns. So as you can see, that's pretty valuable to guarantee that you outspeed your opponent's Pokemon. And on top of that, you also can get a lot of advantages. You can press a lot of early advantages by picking up knockouts and putting your opponent into a really, like, on the back foot by controlling your speed so much more. On top of that, or in addition to that, on the contrary, you have Trick Room. Trick Room is one of my personal favorite speed controls to utilize on a team. But it's essentially, it inverts the speed of the Pokemon on the battlefield for 4 turns. It's a battlefield modifier, but rather than only affecting your side of the battlefield like Tailwind does, Trick Room affects the entire battlefield, and it makes it so slow Pokemon move before fast Pokemon for 4 turns. So that's the general. That is the 2 primary forms of speed control that a lot of people utilize. Other forms of speed control that you can utilize on your team are moves like Bulldoze, Electro Web, and Icy Wind. Those moves will attack either both of your opponent's Pokemon or all the other Pokemon on the field, in the case of Bulldoze, and they are generally weaker moves that have the additional effect of dropping your opponent's speed. So if you take a look at some of these teams, you've got this Raichu doesn't have it. This Regieleki, I believe, does. Yeah, this Regieleki has Electro Web. This is a really good way to attack both of your opponent's Pokemon and drop their speed by 1 stage to help your Pokemon outspeed theirs. Now, obviously, like any other boost, or any other stat boost or stat modifier, if your opponent's Pokemon switches out and then comes back in, it will not have a speed drop on it until you hit it again with Electro Web. There's also, I don't know if Cresselia has it here. I think this Vanillux had it on this Vanillux team. Has Icy Wind. You've also got Bulldoze on Entei, Bulldoze on on Spectrier, and Bulldoze on Arctozolt. A lot of different ways to control speed on this team. These are generally the most common ways. You've got Trick Room, like I said, inverts the speeds for 4 turns. You've got Tailwind that only affects your side of the field, but it doubles all of your Pokemon's speed for 4 turns. And then you also have moves like Icy Wind, Bulldoze, and Electro Web that affect your opponent's speed negatively. Now be careful with Bulldoze, because Bulldoze is unique in that it attacks all other Pokemon on the field besides the user, so it could drop your own Pokemon speed stat as well, so be mindful of that. But up until recently, that was the majority of the speed control. But Sword and Shield introduced a really unique mechanic that both players have access to called Dynamax. Now Dynamax is essentially a stage or a modification you can make any of your Pokemon undergo in a single battle. Only 1 Pokemon can do it per battle, and it only lasts for 3 turns maximum. You don't have to Dynamax your Pokemon. You can Dynamax for 1 turn and then switch it out. You don't have to continue to use all your turns of Dynamax. However, there's some strategic advantages that come with Dynamax. Specifically, that you double your Pokemon's HP for 3 turns, and their moves become a lot stronger. So let's take a look at Metagross, for example. Metagross is a really common, what I like to refer to as Dynamax candidate. Okay, this Pokemon is a good, very strong offensive piece on any team that it's on, and it gets the benefits of being able to Dynamax because all of its moves turn into Dynamax moves. Dynamax moves do not check priority. They are guaranteed accurate to hit for the 3 turns that you get to use it, and the moves that your Pokemon learns turn into their respective Dynamax moves. So, for example, Meteor Mash, when Metagross Dynamax, turns into Max Steel Spike. Thunder Punch turns into Max Lightning, Ice Punch turns into Max Hailstorm, and Stomping Tantrum turns into Max Quake. Now, the base power of those Dynamax moves is determined upon the base power of the base move of the Pokemon. So, for example, if you had a Charizard with Ember, the max flare that Pokemon uses is not going to be as strong as a Charizard with Flamethrower, because Flamethrower is base 90, Ember's base 40. You're going to be looking at quite a bit of a power difference there. In addition to being stronger moves, the moves also provide additional benefits. 4 of the moves, the Fire move, Max Flare, Max Geyser, Max Rockfall, and Max Hailstorm, all set up their respective weathers. Max Lightning, Max Overgrowth, Max Starfall, and Max Mindstorm all set up their respective terrains. And the remaining 10 types that don't have a move yet, or don't have a max move yet, 5 of them increase your active Pokemon stats by 1 stage, and 5 of them decrease your opponent's active Pokemon's stats by 1 stage. So, for example, let's talk about Metagross again here. Max Steel Spike is a steel move that boosts both Metagross and its partner's defense stat by 1 stage. Max Quake boosts Metagross and its partner Pokemon's SPDF stat by 1 stage. Thunder Punch turns into Max Lightning, which sets up electric terrain. And Ice Punch turns into Max Hailstorm, which sets up the hail. So another common one is Glastrier. Max Hailstorm obviously sets up the hail. Max Quake gives you SPDF boosts, and Close Combat turns into Max Knuckle, which gives you an attack boost. Both of you and your active Pokemon are your attack boosts. So these moves are very strong, as you can well imagine. But the one in particular that adds, there's two of them that add unique speed control mechanics, and the best one, arguably the best Dynamax move that you can possibly use for your Pokemon, is Max Airstream. So if your opponent here were to Dynamax their Landorus and use Max Airstream, Landorus and its partner Pokemon would get a speed boost of 1 stage, which, as you can imagine, is very, very, very strong. I don't see any Pokemon on this page that might be implementing a physical move or a normal move, but Dynamax Normal turns into Max Strike, which drops your opponent's speed stat by 1 stage. Oh, Regigigas is the one. Regigigas runs Giga Impact, which when you Dynamax it and you use it turns into Max Strike, which drops your opponent's speed stat by 1 stage. So these 2 moves coming off of the Dynamax Pokemon have proven to be very interesting because they have those secondary effects, and they add additional speed control components to a team, right? So taking a look at these Moltres teams, let's just dive into some of the speed control that some of these teams have. So let's take a look at this Regieleki team here. This Moltres Regieleki team. This Moltres is carrying Electroweb, which, as we talked about, drops your opponent's speed by 1 stage. But in addition to that, it also has the added benefit of Moltres getting Max Airstream off of Hurricane, which gives it another form of speed control to boot. You get the +1 stage on your Pokemon with Max Airstream, and you also get the -1 speed on your opponent's Pokemon with the Electroweb. So that's pretty important, pretty impactful. Really good use of both of those. Moltres is a Pokemon that will often Dynamax, and Regieleki is a common partner for both Moltres and Mamoswine, which looks to be the 2 main modes of offense for this team, with a nice core going on in the back here. So let's take a look at one more team here and just talk about some of these. This is a really interesting one. You have 3 different Pokemon with Bulldoze, which, as we talked about, drops the speed of all active Pokemon on the field. And you also have Icy Wind, which affects your opponent's Pokemon. In addition to this, you don't have a Max Airstream user, but you do have Slush Rush, which is a really cool ability that makes it so Arctozolt gets double its speed stat when it's inside of hail, which Vanillux sets up with Snow Warning. So you got a lot of different ways to control the speed here, and even though you don't have a Max Airstream user like Moltres, you still have 3 different Pokemon with Bulldoze, and you have Icy Wind on top of Slush Rush. which is a fantastic combination of Pokemon here. Um, in addition, a lot of these Dusclops Glastrier teams have Trick Room embedded in them. Dusclops is a very common Trick Room setter. In addition to Dusclops, there's also things like Hatterene that set up Trick Room. There's also Cresselia that commonly sets up Trick Room. And I think that's it for the Trick Room setters on this page. There's some other ones too. They're not as common, but for example, I believe that Aaron's Comfy has Trick Room. And also sometimes Nihilego, I think Day Day's Nihilego has it. Nope, the other Nihilego had it. Has Trick Room as well. So lots of different ways that you can control the speed for your opponent, or for your team, right? As we talked about, very important to control speed. It can be very impactful in a battle to make sure that your Pokemon attack first. It's one of the most important components of a team composition. Generally, you want to have multiple forms of speed control because, like we talked about, competitive VGC has is a format where you build a team of 6 Pokemon, but you only select 4 for a given battle. So if you take a look at, again, looking at the example of Wolfie's team here, he has Max Airstream on Moltres, he has Electroweb on Regieleki, and he has Trick Room on Stakataka, as well as Dusclops. So he has very strong ways to control the speed here, and give himself multiple avenues where he's almost always going to be bringing one of these 4 Pokemon to a battlefield, if not 2, to a given, not a battlefield, to a given battle, and be able to control the speed, whether he's boosting his own speed with Hurricane or with Max Airstream, or dropping his opponents with Electroweb, or setting up Trick Room and looking to deal the damage there. So generally important to have multiple Pokemon that can set the speed for you, or can gain speed control for you. The next thing that I want to talk about is type synergy. So type synergy most notably refers to basically not having Pokemon on your team that are weak to the same things, or if you do have a team that's weak to multiple things, at least having some form of a way to resist or be immune to a certain type. So let's talk about Aaron's team for a second here. Aaron's Metagross team. He has 2 electric types and a steel type. All 3 of these are weak to ground, but he circumvents that by having a ground flying type like Landorus and a grass fairy type, which grass fairy resists ground, and flying types are immune to ground. So even though he has a triple ground weakness here, he also has ways to set up to mitigate that weakness on his team, so he's just not dead in the water to a ground move. He has to be mindful of his positioning, but generally it's not too difficult to do if you can just keep switching in and out when appropriate. But generally, you don't want to have Pokemon on your team that are weak to the same types, generally speaking. A lot of these Urshifu teams are hyper offensive, so sometimes on hyper offensive teams you can get away with having multiple weaknesses on the same team, because you are such an offensive team that's looking to end the game so quickly that if we take a look at Kohei's team here, he's got Zapdos that's weak to rock and ice. He's got a good rock switch in here and a good ice switch in here, but actually, this is very good type synergy overall. This is generally an offensive team. This is a Zapdos that's most likely going to be Dynamaxing a fair amount of the time, getting Airstream boosts via Hurricane, and then Urshifu and Nihilego are both offensively tailored Pokemon that take good advantage of speed boosts, as well as being able to set Trick Room on Nihilego. You also have Clefairy as a really strong form of redirection, is what it's referred to. Follow Me is a really unique move that makes it so all single target moves that your opponent uses gets redirected into Clefairy. So if your opponent targets your Nihilego with a single target ground move like Max Quake, normally it would drop it down to its Sash because Rock and Poison are both weak to ground, but instead it redirects it into Clefairy, and Clefairy takes the damage most likely no problem. You also have multiple Pokemon here with Icy Wind, which is a good way to drop speed, as well as, like I said, Max Airstream, and naturally fast Pokemon all around. On top of that, he doesn't really compound any weaknesses. He has 2 Pokemon weak to ground and only 1 ground immunity with no other ground resists, but that's not a big deal. He's generally going to be attacking first and looking to knock out these Pokemon. He has only 1 electric weakness. He has 2 water weaknesses with a Tapu Fini as a way to switch in and take a water hit, as well as a Zapdos to pressure the water types. He's got 4 times fairy weakness, but he's got a poison type and a fire type for fairy. So all around, this has very good type synergy. He doesn't have multiple Pokemon weak to the same thing without having a way to pressure those Pokemon, right? Which is a big deal for offensive teams. You want to be getting speed control, and you want to be looking to pick up knockouts as often as possible without getting steamrolled through by certain Pokemon. This is one form of a team that you can use. This is what a lot of players refer to as hyper offensive teams. They generally are very fast teams that look to try to pick up knockouts very quickly. Oftentimes they're Dynamaxing on turn 1, though not always, but oftentimes they'll be Dynamaxing on turn 1 and trying to get as much pressure going as they can to spiral knockouts and chain knockouts together to spiral your opponent and push them into a defensive position and set up and then have a numbers advantage in the late game. That's one style of team. A lot of these Galarian Moltres teams that we were talking about originally are what I like to refer to as bulky offense teams. So let's take a look at this team again here. This Regieleki has speed control as Electroweb, has Volt Switch as a really powerful momentum gaining move that allows you to attack and then immediately switch out of the middle of the turn sequence, and then has Screens. Screens are a really powerful damage mitigation route that you can take on a competitive team. You can set up a Light Screen or a Reflect to make it so your opponent's special attack or physical attack respectively deal 1.5, or they get a 50% damage reduction for a duration of the turns, which can be really strong given that a lot of these Pokemon are relatively bulky. You've got Tapu Fini, who's one of the bulkiest water types in the game. You've got Incineroar, who's known for being a very bulky Pokemon with Parting Shot and Intimidate to further drop stats. You've got Moltres, who's really bulky. Amoonguss, who's very bulky. This Regieleki EV spread is most likely defensive, so it's also going to be bulky. And then Mamoswine inside of Screens also going to be quite bulky. This team utilizes a very powerful core of Pokemon, what a lot of players refer to as Fire, Water, Grass. There are 2 of those cores in team building that a lot of players will aim for. Fire, Water, Grass is one of them, and Steel, Fairy, Dragon is the other. The reason why these 2 cores are so powerful is because they allow for very good defensive synergies. For example, let's say Tapu Fini is being pressured by an electric move. Well, I can switch in Amoonguss and cover that weakness. Same with Tapu Fini's being pressured by a grass move. I've got both Incineroar and Amoonguss as switch-ins because they both resist grass. If Incineroar is being pressured by a water move, I can switch in Tapu Fini or Amoonguss and take that hit no problem. If Amoonguss is being pressured by a fire move, I have 2 switches. But even beyond that, a lot of times they cover other weaknesses for each other. So for example, Incineroar is weak to ground, and most grass types do resist ground. This is not a great example because Amoonguss, being a grass poison type, actually doesn't resist ground. It's just neutral to ground. But a lot of other grass types will actually resist ground, which is a very good thing for your grass type to be doing right now. And grass is weak to a handful of other types like bug, which fire resists, and flying, which electric resists, and fire, which fire and water both resist. So Fire, Water, Grass gives you a lot of good defensive synergies, and Steel, Dragon, Fairy gives you a ton of them. You get some immunities. You get, like, Fairy's immune to Dragon, Steel's immune to Poison. Those 2 complement each other very well because Dragon is weak to Dragon, so you can switch in Fairy. Fairy's weak to Steel, so you can switch in Steel. Fairy's also weak to Poison, so you can switch in Steel. So there's a lot of good defensive synergies among those 2 cores. Which is cores that you don't necessarily have to have on your team, but it's not a bad core to aim for when you're like starting to select your Pokemon, thinking about defensive capabilities. But this team is one of my personal, this style of team, I should say, is one of my personal favorites to pilot because the Pokemon themselves are very bulky. You've got good ways to mitigate damage. You've got Light Screen and Reflect, as well as Intimidate plus Parting Shot. And then you've got a Calm Mind Tapu Fini for setting up. And you've also got some redirection with Rage Powder and Spore from the Amoonguss. So this would be a very solid team that I personally would enjoy playing just based on the look of it. It's what's referred to as bulky offense. Those are the two main styles. There's some heavy Trick Room teams. A lot of times, let me see if I can find one. I think Mr. Talent's team here is probably the closest thing to heavy Trick Room that you can think of, or that you would normally see. It only has one Trick Room setter in Hatterene, but it has Torkoal, Glastrier, or Torkoal and Glastrier, who both love being inside Trick Room. They both want to be inside Trick Room. And then he's got an additional mode here of Venusaur with Chlorophyll for the speed boost that comes along with Sunny Day boost, and Urshifu for the non-Trick Room stuff. And then Indeedee provides a very nice way to set up your Trick Room. You've got Psychic Terrain, which prevents moves like Fake Out, and you've also got Follow Me Redirection, so that way you can safely get off a Trick Room. So this is a pretty heavy Trick Room team. It does have some things going for it that make it so you don't have to have Trick Room, but the vast majority of these other 4 Pokemon are going to want to be inside of Trick Room. And that's the majority of a lot of teams will do what Wolf's team did here, where they have multiple modes on the team, and this team has a Trick Room mode in addition to a offensive like Airstream mode. And so I like the synergy here as well, where you can take a variety of different roles with your team, and also you aren't really overlapping any weaknesses. You have a 4 times weakness to ground and a weakness to ground here, but you have an immunity. You actually have 2 immunities, and you have a way to pressure it. You have a dark and ghost weakness, and you have a dark and ghost resist. Electric weakness, you have an electric resist. So a lot of good type synergies here as well. This is another team that I personally would think that I would enjoy playing because it's got a lot of options and a lot of decisions to be made around it, and it's got the screens Regieleki as well, which makes it very bulky. So that covers my next 2 points here, which was type synergy and multidimensional. Wolf's team is a great example of a multidimensional team because it's a team that can operate inside and outside of Trick Room. So remember, it has multiple. It's not a one-dimensional team like it doesn't. Basically, when you think about a one-dimensional team, you think about like a one-trick pony. So, for example, a lot of these offensive Urshifu teams, like this Zapdos team, even though you do have ways of fighting Trick Room by setting your own Trick Room with Nihilego or with redirection from Clefairy, this team is not carrying very many Pokemon that have the move Protect, and they're all very fast Pokemon in general, so you don't really want to be inside of Trick Room. So this team has a very huge Trick Room weakness. It tries to mitigate that a little bit by having Trick Room as an option on Nihilego, because if you use Trick Room while Trick Room is active, you essentially reset it so it wouldn't be active, basically. And then Clefairy being a way to protect your Pokemon from taking super effective hits by redirecting them. Also a good tool to have in Trick Room matchups. But generally, this team would not want to be in Trick Room. Whereas if you take a look at Wolf's team again, or any of these other teams that we mentioned so far, his team has a lot of different, because you're only selecting 4 of the 6, you have a lot of different ways that you can lead. You can lead Regieleki plus Moltres to get up screens and do offensive things with Moltres. You can do the same thing with Tapu Fini. Or you can set up Trick Room with Dusclops and bring Stakataka. Also, Tapu Fini does well with an Electroweb reduction, or it can do okay inside Trick Room too. So a lot of things going on for this team as well. So yeah. And the last thing I want to say about team building is just keep in mind who you're going to be Dynamaxing in a battle. You don't always want to run a team that has multiple Pokemon that I like to refer to it as like Dynamax candidates. So who are you looking to Dynamax on a team, and trying to build around them or trying to build to exploit them is generally a pretty strong option. A lot of these offensive teams like this Zapdos one, in theory, it's looking to Dynamax Zapdos the vast majority of the time, but it could also Dynamax Nihilego as well as Tapu Fini and still be okay. Potentially even Entei could Dynamax as well. But Clefairy, being a defensive piece, is not usually going to want to Dynamax. And Urshifu is a fighting type, and fighting types struggle in Dynamax because as a way to offset the offensive boosts that you get from Max Knuckle as well as Max Ooze from poison moves, they actually weakened the first move that you use. So if you Dynamax Urshifu, the first time you use Max Fighting, it's going to be weaker than every other Dynamax move, whether it's Max Geyser, Max Starfall, Max Lightning, Max Airstream, whatever, to offset that damage increase. So, and Urshifu also is doing way more damage with Choice Band. So generally, it's not going to be a Pokemon that you're going to want to go for as a Dynamax candidate. So this team is generally built around Zapdos Dynamaxing with the options of Nihilego and Tapu Fini as well. If you take a look at Joe UX9's team, he's got a Moltres that that is usually going to be wanting to Dynamax. He also has Metagross that's usually going to be wanting to Dynamax with the options of Tapu Fini and Kartana as Dynamax candidates as well. Looking at Wolf's team again, Wolf built his team with Moltres in mind as a Dynamax candidate as well as Stakataka, but also had the option of Tapu Fini or Landorus as Dynamax candidates, but those two are generally going to want to be non-Dynamax. Landorus is going to want to be pivoting in and out to get Intimidate drops, and Tapu Fini gets a bigger damage boost from Choice Specs than it would from Dynamax. What's another team we looked at together? We can talk about where was that team? We looked at this one. This one is going to be basically this left column here is the best Dynamax candidates. Inside a Trick Room, Hatterene's a very scary Dynamax candidate, and so is Glastrier. And then Venusaur has a really strong Gigantamax form that sets up a hazard that does chip damage at the end of every turn off of its grass move. So this trainer built their team very strongly suited to help benefit these three Pokemon. He's got Sunny Day on Drought Torkoal to give Chlorophyll boost to Venusaur. They have Trick Room for Hatterene, and they have Trick Room for Glastrier, as well as Urshifu just being a nice cleanup Pokemon at the end of Dynamaxes. So that's the vast majority of what I wanted to talk about today with team building. So keep in mind what kind of speed control you're bringing to a battle. Do you have a Dynamax Airstream user? Do you have a Trick Room option? Do you have Electroweb or Icy Wind or Bulldoze? Do you have Tailwind on your team? What kind of things do you have there? What kind of type synergies do you have? Do you have a bunch of Pokemon weak to the same type? Because maybe you want to revisit that and look to pick some other options. Can you mitigate the type synergies by having offensive options? Like maybe you have 3 Pokemon weak to ground like Aaron Zhang's team here, but you have an immunity and a resistance and good ways to pressure the ground types. Also, defensive cores, Steel, Fairy, Dragon, and Fire, Water, Grass are very good defensive cores that give you a lot of resistances just with them. And then the last thing, keep in mind what your team is doing. Are you an offensive team like a lot of these Urshifu teams, like this Zapdos one that we keep looking at? This is an offensive team. Are you an offensive team? Or the team you're building offensive? Maybe you need to think about. You don't want to have too many conflicting things on your team. Like for example, I wouldn't put Zapdos, Nihilego, Urshifu, and Clefairy on a team and then give that team a Trick Room option, like a Glastrier or a Stakataka or something, because that's too many conflicting things going on. It's generally not going to be well suited for you. And then if you're defensive or if you're a bulky offensive team like this, think about who your Dynamax candidates are. Make sure that you don't have multiple Pokemon on your team that you're building as Dynamax options. Generally, you want to have 2 really strong Dynamax candidates with 1 to 2 additional options that can Dynamax when needed, like we talked about with Wolf's team being built around the Moltres and the Stakataka, with Landorus and Finny as options. Same with Joe's team. Moltres and Metagross are the primary Dynamax candidates, with Kartana and Tapu Fini being decent options as well. And definitely take a look at these teams from Victory Road. They are fantastic. They're great resources. There's no limit. You can only have 5 of them active at a time, but you can always give them back. Like maybe you want to try Wolfie's team, and then you try it for 5 or 6 games, realize it's not really for you, so you just give it back. You don't worry about it, and you go try another team. As long as you keep remembering to give back teams, you can keep renting as many teams as you want, and you can just have fun learning how to play through the doubles battles before you start getting into too much of your team building. My next video I'm hoping to do tomorrow. I want to do some team building on stream, because I got some ideas in my head that I've been thinking about, and I want to get them down into paper and start visualizing them, and maybe start doing some testing and see how the team goes. And I want to kind of show you guys the thought process that I go through when I team build, and what I talk through. So yeah, anyway, thank you very much for hanging out. I hope this video was informative for you, and it gave you some information that you maybe didn't have before. I hope that I made sense of everything I was talking about with these type synergies and everything. I want to make sure that you guys are getting good information as to how to team build for yourself, or where to find these teams if you need to. We should be expecting an update on this here soon, where they include more rental teams. So keep an eye out on that. Just because a team is a little bit outdated doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad team. It's still very strong. So definitely give these a check out. Thanks again for watching. Subscribe if you like what you see. Otherwise, leave me a comment with things that you liked or didn't like. I love getting your feedback and constructive criticism, and I will see you all next time.